Okay.
We're going to go ahead and start our recording and welcome folks. I know we might have some folks joining us a little bit late, and we're obviously going to record, but we'll start out by saying welcome to 2023. I can't believe we're already here. We've had a great pre-event discussion with Howard, and I'm really excited to continue that as we go forward today. I'm going to start out by introducing the board from the Chicago Sales Enablement Society. We've got Tim, Mia, Jess, Alex, Michelle, Ray, Gail, and Shannon in the Chicago board. And we're really excited to host some great events this year, including a handful of web events. We're going to do some more live events, so we have the opportunity to really bring our community together. And we're going to work to support the nationwide SES and hopefully see some more Chicago folks at the conference later this year. I started thinking about the introduction for this session and some recent LinkedIn posts that I've been making and others. And I started really thinking about the idea of community quite a great deal. And I think the idea of bringing people together in these webinars and live events is really the way for us to make a difference. And that's very much the anchor for the Chicago Sales Enablement Society. So one of the ways that we make a difference, and one of the things that makes our organization different, is the opportunity to continue to pursue learning opportunities for our own teams. As enablement folks, we're always fostering learning within the community, but this is a chance for us to learn ourselves. So that's our goal, is making sure that we're making a difference by providing these educational opportunities and discussion opportunities as well. And that's going to be really important this year, as we've talked about. We're really going to need to bring our community together and stay strong. We've had a lot of ups and downs within the community, a lot of ups and downs within the workforce. As Howard was talking about, we've come through a manic period of a great deal of enablement growth and hiring, and now we're seeing that kind of crazy constriction going exactly the other way. And this is where our community is going to be really important. So obviously here with the Sales Enablement Society, the Enablement Squad, if anybody's not a part, a really great Slack community, fabulous job board, especially for connecting. The WISE group, we have Allison on, who's part of our Chicago WISE group, really a wonderful opportunity to connect with other enablement folks. There are a handful of people who are doing great job boards on LinkedIn, really helping the community, and then making sure we have the opportunity to go online, to be part of our Slack communities, and to meet in person. Those are all ways that we can collaborate together to make a difference. And so with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Alex Sakakis. Alex is the head VP of Sales Enablement over at Sales Assembly. He's going to be hosting our session today with Dr. Howard Dover, and we're going to be talking about the Sales Innovation Paradox book. But again, we've got a relatively small group. We'd love to be able to bring questions, so put them in chat or raise your hand, and we'll be able to add people into the discussion as we have it. So with that, Alex, I'll turn it over to you.
Cool. Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Dr. Dover, for setting aside some time for us today. I've got some questions up here on the screen for us, sort of like ripped right from the book, but I'd love a little background first, if you don't mind. Maybe you'd be willing to share a bit about your sort of history and maybe it'll lead us up to like why you decided to write the book.
Well, I entered sales when I was like 5 years old, and I grabbed some junk mail from my mom's counter and tried to sell it to the neighbors. And that's when I learned two things. Number one, the neighbors actually gave me money, and I came home and my mom was just aghast. And she said, you can't do that. And I said, but they gave me money. And she said, you have to go give it back. And I said, okay, well, what did I do wrong? And she said, well, you didn't give them anything of value. And I said, okay, well, so if I create something of value and they give me money, can I keep it? And she said, yes. And to her chagrin, I created a puppet show and then went around and sold even, I think I made $1 off the junk mail. Then I went out and I sold like lots of tickets. I think I made $4 to $5 off of the puppet show tickets. And then nobody showed up to the to the show. So I was kind of like the producers. I was like, wow, this is a great financial machine. I can just keep selling tickets and no one will show up. I didn't realize, though, when I went back to the same neighbors and asked them to buy tickets to the next show, they looked at me and said, hey, you know what? You were cute the first time. You know, you're kind of missing the point. Anyway, I grew up in a wealthy area, but as a very poor kid. And so I learned that going out to sell was going to be the differentiator if I wanted to do it to get things that my parents couldn't give me. My parents were good parents, but my dad was a janitor. You know, he worked hard, but you know, it was tough. So from that, I ran my own sales company to put myself through school when I was younger, put my wife through school too. And then I strangely went to the state of Oregon and began a life of developing technology for the state of Oregon. I'd actually done that for my company as well when I owned the company. And so I consider myself now kind of a sales technologist. So I started the program at UT Dallas about 10 years ago. I was invited to UT Dallas to close the gap because back then, UT Dallas, 80% of the students were going into sales jobs, but they weren't teaching sales and they were embarrassed. So they asked me if I could come and do something about that. And I had got my PhD there, so it's kind of an honor to be invited back to your PhD granting. And I've been there ever since. I thought I'd only stay for like 4 to 5 years, and now they kind of don't want me to go anywhere. So that's the history.
Yeah,
and I was at the founding meeting of the Sales Enablement Society. So way back when, I noticed that Mario Martinez, Kurt Shaver, and Jill Rowley were all going to go to North Carolina the Friday before Thanksgiving. And I called up my friend Rob Peterson. I said, I don't know what's happening, but something's going down. Because several people that I follow are saying they're showing up in West Palm Beach, Florida, the Friday before Thanksgiving, and I don't know what it is. And he said, are you kidding me? I can't get, I can't get travel authorization to go to the Breakers right before Thanksgiving I said, hey, we got to go. So Rob Peterson and I, my colleague who's done a lot of research in enablement, I think he serves on the national board currently, and he and I attended, and we documented from an ethnographic standpoint the emergence of sales enablement as a profession in the society as in the early years. So
that's a heck of history. Tell you what,
it is. I don't sell junk mail anymore. It's not a lucrative profession.
It's coming back though.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, let's not all hold our breath. Like maybe that's the key to success going forward. Let's shift into the book specifically. So clearly you've got a lot of thoughts on sales, on the history of sales, of how we've arrived here. What was the impetus for writing this book?
The impetus was in Dallas, we get about 100, pre-COVID, it was 200 to 300 inbound calls a year from sales organizations who want to hire salespeople. So for a decade, I've had visibility on so many different strategies and deployment. And so I first started seeing some of the anomalies of people deploying tech for exponential performance. And so I became a kind of an advocate to say, why can't we speed that up? And then I started watching companies speed it up, and yet they somehow, both individually and the field collectively, started reducing performance effectiveness as they turned on technology for efficiency. And to me, that just was counterintuitive. I really looked at it and said, this doesn't make any sense. We should be having huge leaps. And this comes back to my time with the government. I mean, I was brought in for one project where it took 50 hours to generate a report. And after 4 months, 6 months of work by observing the business process, I was able to reduce that process to 5 minutes with technology. And these are the kind of things we would think we would see, right? When we deploy a lot of technology, is that we see these exponential gains in efficiency. And then hopefully we also see maybe even not quite exponential moves in efficacy, but at least gains. And I wasn't seeing it consistently. I was seeing a couple anomalies where people were just kicking it really well. But a vast majority of people, actually, when they turned on technology, it was almost like they got worse. And then collectively, as a ecosystem, we did get worse because our buyers started getting annoyed with us. And so that became the why is this going on? And so I began to study it for years, talking to a lot of different executives. Once again, getting those several hundred inbound a year, probably 30 to 100 of those were execs. And listening to them actually telling me in private, I'm scared stiff because I don't know what works anymore. And when I started hearing that pretty consistently, probably about a year and a half before the pandemic, like we know what we're doing, but it isn't working anymore. And so I started presenting some things on stage around this. And every time I got off the stage, people would say, so are there articles? Is there a book? I mean, do you do a podcast? Do you do blogs? And I'm like, no, I'm thinking about this, and I brief my partners. So we have about 20 to 30 partners at UTD that we brief, and we learn and collaborate together, and we move the field forward as a collaborative unit. We learn from them, they learn from us, and we allow them to cross-pollinate. So a lot of my knowledge is coming from these moments of talking with these companies, seeing what isn't working, and seeing those few who are just busting it out big. And so I wanted to figure out why. And that's what the book is for.
Very interesting. I've got a couple of clarifying questions, and then, like I said, I'll dive into some of these questions on the screen.
Okay.
You've mentioned tech a few times, and I think those of us in sales or enablement, tech could mean any number of things, right? It could be the CRM, it could be the dialer that we use, it could be the call listening, it could be the content management system. When you say tech, is it a holistic way in which you're referring to tech? Like any tech is starting to slow us down, or is it like a specific type of technology? I guess, like, maybe give us a sense of how you're thinking about technology specifically.
Well, I think I would perceive that tech is once again deployed in the way I described, right? The purpose of technology is to either replace redundant function that humans really should never be doing in the first place. If we can do it with technology and do it equal to the human, let's have humans do things that only humans can do and humans can do well. And then there's the question. So that, according to Tom Davenport, who has written several books in this space, he talks about it between automation and augmentation. So the one piece of it is automation, which is, how do I automate things that should be automated? And if you're going to fight against that, I'm sorry, that's a train that's just going to wipe you out. But then there's the augmentation piece. So which is, how do I take the human and I augment their capacity to function? And so, when I think about technology, I'm thinking about that two-dimensional concept. We should be automating things that are redundant, and a human is just bored ad nauseum to do them. And then we should be augmenting the human touch point with as much relevant information as possible. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the way I look at it.
Okay, that is helpful. What I would say to that end is, it sounds like it's less about the type of technology, whether it's helping you set calendar invites or helping you write better messages or listen to your calls or whatever. It's more about the outcome of the technology, the augmentation versus the automation, both being something that are sort of relevant to this conversation. Does that feel right?
Yeah, and I think in the book what I try to tease out, and whether I did a good job or not, I don't know. So that's why I do these kind of things, to hopefully close the gap, is what I've seen is that we've turned on technology, but we've maintained classic motion. And so when you take a bad or a classic motion that's ineffective to the current buyer behavior, and you simply turn technology on, either the automation or the augmentation in that particular moment, what you actually get is a false sense of efficiency, but you actually have a decrease in efficacy over time, because you really tick off the customer. And then when you look at it in aggregate, when everybody's doing that simultaneously, everybody's ticking off the customer. And this is evidenced by Gartner coming out last year saying that 78% of buyers don't want to talk to a rep. They want a rep-free experience. And yet what those buyers are really saying, they're not saying, I don't want to talk to a sales rep. They're saying, I don't value 78% of what I'm ever getting from a sales rep. That's a pretty damning statistic for the field. And if we don't wake up to it, by the way, it was 44% when I initially moved that into the publishing space. That was my documentable statistic. It's moved to 78% since. And that's only been less than 6 months. It's moved up that high. So we're really ticking off the buyer. And so this is a problem, right? If we continue doing what we've always done, we're going to not only get the results we've always gotten, we're actually going to get worse results than what we've gotten, which is the exact opposite of the experience curve.
That's an interesting, I want to dive into that just like one step further, which is, do you believe that it is the selling behavior? Well, it sounds like you believe that the selling behavior was the primary reason for that statistic changing versus the buying behavior being different.
I think it's a combination. So there's 3 different models that I identify in the book, and I hope they'll survive the test of time. I really wrote the models to be really time agnostic, so they should be able to pierce through. And one of the models is that the buyer is being constantly modified by technology. The seller is being constantly modified by technology, but the buyer gets a second dose, and the buyer gets modified by our sales motion and approach. So this is why best practices are very dangerous. The second we design a best practice, right? We identify a practice. I was just on a call the other day. I didn't want to challenge my friend, but I just began to shiver when he said, what we do, and we're stuck in this, by the way, folks, we're stuck in this. We go find what's working, then we identify the motions that person's making, and then we replicate or we try to scale it. And what we find is, if that's true, everybody's doing that simultaneously. By the way, the buyer determines whether that's effective long-term, not your coaching, not your training. So in some ways, we're kind of in a space that I'd like to propose that we're really in a broken moment, that we're stuck in models that really worked before but don't work now because of some of the movements that are happening both by technology. So we have actors, right? We have sellers, and then we have buyers, and then we have systems that we try and methods and skills we try to train our salespeople to do. But the buyers are all figuring this out. Let me give you a specific example, Alex, of a combination of what I call the stab cycle. So I have a ring on my front door in my house in Texas. And in Texas, it's hot, it's horrible. It was 80 degrees yesterday. It's now 30 degrees today. So we enjoyed our summer in the middle of January for 2 days. We have big houses because we have big air conditioning and you don't go really outside much. So I'm never near my front door. And so when somebody knocks on my front door, that's a classic motion, right? I'm going to knock on a door to try to sell something to somebody. And so I have a ring. That's a technological component for me. I'm the buyer. So I bought a ring really because we were getting packages and we were worrying about, right, people stealing them. So we got a ring. And a side benefit of that ring is I see who knocks on my door. If it's my neighbor, I'm like, hey, if I'm on I text my wife and say, hey, the neighbor's down there, or whoever's not on a Zoom call, we get to the door. If it's somebody with a logo, we go, salesperson. So now let me talk to you about the sales innovation and my behavioral shift to the sales innovation. So I don't know who out there is teaching this technique, but I love them. And I want to thank them for what they've done for me as a homeowner, because somebody is teaching door-to-door salespeople as a best practice that you knock on the door and you step 10 steps back beyond the threshold. And I understand the psychology of this, right? I'm a I train salespeople. I understand the psychology of this, because if I were to open my door and you're right near me, I'm going to kind of bring it back to me. So if you're 10, right, if you're off beyond the threshold, I'm going to step out on past my door because of the proximity. It's just a kindness, especially down here in the South. So I'm going to walk out of my door, which reduces the likelihood I'm going to shut my door. So that's training, right? So that's the training component. But guess what? It actually becomes a signal to me that when you knock on my door, I see you in the ring and you're beyond my threshold. I'm like, salesperson, I don't need to move, because you're going to move. You're going to get off my doorstep and I don't even need to worry about you. That stabs. I've been technically modified. I'm using that technology, but now I'm using it more to actually identify a salesperson and avoid the pitch. This is just one example. This is happening all across the B2B spectrum. And what have we done to solve it? We've deployed technology to assault the customer. Gartner just released, it takes 66 touches to get the first meeting. So I promise you there are hundreds of companies, if not thousands of companies, that are going to update their cadence cycle for 66 touches. And you think the buyer is just going to sit there and go, oh, goody, I get touched 66 more times. No. And then, so the two things we're going to do is we're going to up the communication cycle, because more volume will get us what we need. And then we're going to hire more, which is exactly what we've experienced over the last few years. We've increased the headcount and we've increased the capacity of the headcount to a point where the noise is deafening. And we are in the Dust Bowl. If you were at the first Sales Enablement Conference, I did a presentation on the Dust Bowl. We are absolutely in Dust Bowl conditions in our market currently. And so, but you can't get leaders to see this because they know what they know. And that's the end of the book. That's our challenge. It's really hard to get out of this. It takes real leadership to get out.
Howard, Alex, if you don't mind me jumping in, I don't know if I don't know if you saw my face when you said 66 touches, but I just went like this, like it's like you're just deploying, we're all deploying thousands and thousands and thousands of people to go knocking door to door to door to door to door. So if technology is changing the buyer behavior, if we're getting better and better and better at not answering the door, two questions: what's making us eventually answer it at 66 touches, or what are we as the people who are trying to enable salespeople going to be telling them on how to get to break through, right? That noise is so loud.
Well, I think the chat, once again, I think, Gail, we were talking about little s, big S before. So this comes down to, is enablement the function of, and I know this is debatable, and that's okay. I think debate is good. I think it's good to challenge each other with our thinking. So I don't expect everybody to agree with me, but sales enablement S is the sales leader tells you what they need you to do, and you support that function. Or you go to your sales leader, which is big S, and you say, hey, sales leader, given the 66 touches, given the tech explosion, given the behavioral shift of the buyer, I think we need to completely redesign and rethink our go-to-market strategy. Now, that's big S enablement. Now, some of you would say that's not enablement. That's okay. I would call it strategic enablement. But the sales field and sales executives and the C-suite is desperately hungry for strategic go-to-market, not little less deployment of the same old classic machine. And this is where we're stuck, right? I mean, and so to answer your question, Gail, why does it eventually work? I don't know. Eventually people actually get exhausted. They maybe get fooled. I mean, they eventually, technically, some people actually need it, right? At the end of the day, you just get lucky, right? You're contacting somebody who really needs your product and goes, yeah, hey, thanks for contacting me. And so we the warm versus the cold market's always a fascinating concept. And that's really hard. We can't gauge our systems off that. And that's the challenge. We want to systematize everything, but the buyer isn't necessarily systematizable because they're in a constant state of movement based off technology and the assault. When we think about this, let me just throw the numbers down. In the last 6 years, we have had a 13-fold increase in the number of SDRs. At the same time, we've increased the capacity of one SDR to do touches at 10 to 100 times the rate. You could go to infinity if you want to, if you fully automate the touch, but that's called marketing. But we have humans acting like bots and bots acting poorly like humans. And so if we're touching the customer 130 times more than we did just 6 years ago, I just have a question. Did we increase buyers by that much? We didn't.
Right.
At best, we increased buyers by 2. Gartner used to say it was 6.8. Their now consensus is it's closer to 13 to 15. So we had a multiple of 2 over the same period of time, but we've increased our capacity to touch by 130x to 1300x. And we think it's going to work. We live in a good enough world. That's our challenge. We live in a good enough world. Yeah. Good enough actually gets revenue. It's kind of back to that story. When you're cute and you show up at your neighbor's door and you sell junk, they sometimes buy. But you can't build a model off that, right? You can't build a model off that. But we're all trying to build models off what used to work. Even 6 months ago, my class in digital prospecting, we cannot do the same thing 6 months later. It changes within 6 months. The efficacy of a rollout changes in 6 months. So we have to constantly update that curriculum. It doesn't work a year from year. There is no way to create a best practices strategy because the buyer is in constant state of movement. So hopefully that's going deep, and we're way off the notes, Alex.
Way off. Which, I mean, if we're being honest, we're just jumping around the notes in different ways because we've talked about what's the status of sales today. We talked about where we should ostensibly be given the experience curve. I guess my follow-up to what you just sort of walked us through is you've really detailed how the prospecting or like first initial stages of buying and selling have grossly changed. Do you have a sense that the rest of the buying cycle is significantly altered as well? Or is it primarily in this sort of like attention getting stage phase?
Oh, no, I think it's across the cycle. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, it's not our fault. It's not our fault. It's not our fault. So let's get, it's not our fault. Okay. So let me start with that. And then let me talk to you about where we're at. We teach methodologies. Why do we teach methodologies? Because they're tractable. We can build orgs around a methodology. We can execute on a methodology. We can train people from 0 to methodology. Dr. Left Bonney from Florida State, several years ago, was pulled in by a couple of the clients at Florida State and said, hey, we deployed this methodology and only 20% of it was effective. And he said, and they said, we think it's because 20% of our, only 20% of our training actually stuck. And what he actually found out was, no, that's really not true. What's really going on is that only 20% of the time is the methodology you chose the right methodology to deploy. See, the challenge is the buyer doesn't want to be processed through the methodology. They're in a buyer's journey that's independent of your methodology. And this is a fundamental challenge that we have. Is it training to a buyer's journey versus training a methodology is something we're fundamentally struggling with as a field. So when you can map the buyer's journey, I can do a workshop on this and I know exactly where everybody's going to go. And I have to lean in. I have to have 3 to 4 hours to do this workshop. Because when I ask people to do it, I say, tell me the buyer's journey. And inevitably, if you all want to do this with your sales team, it's you know where it's going to go, which is they're going to talk to you about the touch point and how do I touch the customer and how do I process them? And they're going to talk about, okay, I send them an email and then they respond to me and then this happens and then that happens and then this happens. And you almost want to lean into that. You got to let it flesh out and then you've got to take a moment and you say to all of them, wow, you just described what you do to the customer. Now, could you actually think through the buyer's journey? And the way you do that is you have them talk about day in the life of an executive, day in the life of my buying team, not their professional lives, folks, day in the life, right? My dog got out this morning. That's my life. I went to dinner last night with friends from London. That's my life. My life is not my work. Now let's talk about my professional life. What do I care about in my professional life? That's my journey. That's my buyer's journey. But we define the buyer's journey as, oh, only if it's relevant to us do we recognize their journey. And so we build models off our false sense of a buyer's journey. But the second we become relevant, Alex, to the buyer, the actual journey of the buyer and the professional, the actual business and the individual players in that, then it's exponential performance differentials. I don't go from 78%, I become like the most trusted advisor and I'll pick up the phone every day. I'll talk to you. When you touch base, I don't touch base. I understand your buyer's journey. You got a very complex process you're working through. And if I understand that jobs to be done framework by Gartner, the 4 stages that buyers have to go through in a complex sale, then I'm going to understand that maybe somebody in your team is all the way back in the non-decision space, which is the reason the deal isn't going forward. But there is really no single methodology that we can put to market. This is why, once again, when I talk about little s versus big S, if we're deploying a little s strategy, we actually have a strategic challenge. And Gail, we were talking about some of the layoffs, right? And once again, I hope I'm talking amongst friends and you aren't mad at me, but I really do care about people and livelihoods. And that's why, to me, this really hurts me too, Gail. What we're doing is we're asking people to do things that don't work in scale strategies that will fail. And then when the dance music stops, we're playing musical chairs, folks, and they're going to say there's no seat for you because what we're doing doesn't work. Now, how we get there is a discovery process that we all need to join. I wouldn't tell you that I've got it figured out, but I've been playing with it through the pandemic at UT Dallas. We've learned a lot. And one of the things I've learned is this. Number one, so I'm not sure you can deploy this at an org level because I've seen it fail so many times. And that's in the latter half of the book. And if you'd like me to, within about 5 to 6 interviews with your teams, I could identify what element of inertia you're running into and why you will struggle to develop this and where your challenges lie. I've done it for a couple of Fortune 50s, and it's amazing how many interviews. It's only a few interviews before I identify where the inertia is. And so the challenge is we have people who know what they're doing, but they're living in a moment where their model doesn't fit. The models we're deploying aren't appropriate for the moment we live in, and that is reality. But we don't know where we need to go, and so we stick with what we know. And then the other component here is, so that's the first thing, organizational, it's very hard to execute. Microsoft has achieved it for 3 to 4 years running with their demand gen team, and they have astronomical performance. It's ridiculous the numbers they're getting. But it's rare. I've seen it in other orgs and then it just disappears. And I cover that in the book. I don't want to get in the weeds. The second piece is it's easier to do it at a team level, but I need to have support or allowance from the executive leadership that I'm going to deviate. I'm going to allow deviation from the model and exploration and really trying to get a team that's literally trying to figure this out differently and almost kind of break the rules. This is not compliance-based. This is not, hey, you got to do it the same way every time. It's no, what works and then cross-pollinate. What works, then cross-pollinate. Kind of our training models of the past are rigid and our customers aren't appreciating it. So then the next level, which is very fascinating, when I went into the pandemic, I said, well, this is CEOs being stupid. You know, I'm an academic, so I can say those kind of things. Or CROs just being Neanderthals, which I can say those kind of things too. And I have called CROs that and known that I may never see them again. So if you ever need a doctor to dress down your exec team, just give me a call. I'm okay doing that. And then maybe you'll have an easier time getting something done. Heng's used me a few times, by the way. But what surprised me is during the pandemic, we've been playing with this, right, in the curriculum. We've been training people differently, very unorthodox concepts in how to think from the buyer's perspective, not the seller's perspective, in deep thought around frameworks. And what I found was that my alumni were busting out at differentials of 2x on appointment setting, right? So from the SDR space, looking at a 2x, 3x differential. But when it was revenue based, so this comes to your question, Alex, of is it just in the beginning or is it deep into the cycle? On a revenue base, they were 10xing and 8xing their peers. And I interviewed them during the pandemic, and the one thing that stuck with them was probing and adjusting. If you're going to go to market and the buyer's constantly in a state of movement, you cannot develop a best practice. You probe to where the buyer is, and then you have to adjust the strategy in continuous space. This changes what we train people for. We don't train them on a methodology, we train them for skills. And business acumen and some of the other challenges come into place. Do I know if this is executable? To be honest with you, I think it's challenging, but the companies I've seen who have done it have exponential performance. They have happier salespeople. It was just at Southwest Airlines the other day. And what I love hearing a sales organization tell me is, I have 300 salespeople, but I'm only hiring 1 or 2 this year. What does that tell us? I mean, we all know what Southwest Airlines just went through, right? They just went through a really ugly moment in the history of their company, and they're having to earn back respect. And I heard some of the things they're doing. It's actually phenomenal. But you would think that morale would be relatively, right? They're kind of in the eye of the storm. I'm looking forward to writing a post later this afternoon on that visit. because they're in the eye of a hurricane storm, right? They've had the brunt and they're on the other side of the brunt. I couldn't tell. They had an environment that was like, hey, we know we screwed up. We know what we need to do. We're doing it. We got to still go out and sell. We got to hit our numbers, and we got to support our customer success team. We got to do everything we can to let our customers know we care and that we know we did a mistake, and ask for their business. And they've been doing it. And boy, I tell you, the energy on that level and the performance that they've got at the AISP Leadership Summit. This was rolled out pre-pandemic 2019, showing that they had achieved a 3 to 4x performance differential against the baseline. And they have not had to add a huge amount of salespeople ever since, and they continue to have performance differentials. But I even have small companies doing the same thing. So this isn't about huge org, little org. It's about commitment and understanding that we're kind of stuck in a classic sales machine. 80 to 90% of the market, even as high as 92% of the market, is stuck in a classic machine. And the SDR explosion actually created a modern equivalent that continues to build the machine. HBR article by Brent Adamson and Matt Dixon, and I think Nick Toman years ago about the sales machine is kind of the view of that. And everybody keeps building the machine because it's buildable. It's manageable, it's tractable. So that's why we're stuck. And if you're in a little less function, you're just doing what you're told. But this is a moment, if we want to see things long-term, we have to kind of move to that big S component and say, yeah, but maybe we're doing the wrong things from day one. Maybe we need to think about this. Now, most execs, by the way, this is a challenge in the book, right? If you're one of these execs, you're going to have huge performance differentials if you could deploy this, which means the likelihood of you staying in that position more than 18 months is extremely low. So the likelihood it is sustainable is almost close to zero. So that's the challenge at the CEO level, but that's not our challenge. If we're going to create place for ourselves that is valuable, and I think sales enablement did have its moment, and I think the need is still acutely there for strategic thinking and realignment of our go-to-market strategies. And those who want to join that discussion and fight, believe me, executives are dying for that kind of thinker right now. But if all we're going to do is do what the newest classic sales machine executive asked me to do, then when they fail, we're going to go with them. And that's the challenge in the world we live in. And the current economic environment is a tsunami for a lot of different issues right now for enablement people and people who are trained in classic methodologies. So hopefully that's helpful. That's a bit of a get up on a soapbox and challenge you all, because I know you do good work. I know you do hard work. I know you're creative. I know you're good people, and you have good hearts in sales enablement communities, but we have to rise to the moment. So that's my challenge to you, is rise to the moment. It has nothing to do with the book. It just has to do with the moment and time we find ourselves in. I try to tease at some of our issues in the book. So.
Thank you, Howard. We'd love to open up to any questions that, if anybody wants to come off mute and ask a question. I've seen some great chats. Some people are really excited about what you've had to say. But anything that anybody would like to specifically ask Dr. Dover?
So how do you suggest we start these conversations with the executives, specifically with the big S? You're like, okay, I've got this. I've read the book, which I actually do have in front of me, Dr. Dover, and I'm decided I'm going to go to my VP of sales. And in my mind, we're doing this all wrong. We need to make some changes. How does that conversation go?
Well, first off, if you're doing it all wrong, the VP of sales doesn't see it.
That's the exact reason for my question.
Yeah,
so we're on the same page.
I think that's why I'm saying I think for for me to come in and I look at those things, and I can look the VP in the eye and say, here's the reason you continue to have the struggle you have. And I have that conversation several times a month with people. And I think part of the challenge is to say, I don't think that's the way it's going to go, Alex, right? I think what it's going to be is that there's either incremental or transformational change, and either you're able to do incremental or you're able to do transformational. But I also think it's important that that we understand that we're operating in a classic space and saying, I've been looking at our efficacy and it seems to be dropping off. So I'm wondering why that is. And so I read this book and it's making me think, and we have a discussion about that.
I like that.
Because efficacy is dropping off for most players if they're in a classic model. Because the buyer is continually saying, leave me alone. You're not valid to me. You're not helping me. And yet the exponential gains are so phenomenal. And I formed an institute late last year. My goal is to try to document the breakouts so that you could, instead of saying, hey, we're doing it all wrong, you could say, hey, here's the white paper related to Microsoft, or here's the white paper related to what Encapture did. And I wonder, is there anything we could do along these lines? Those are the conversations, right? That's getting into strategic thinking to say, I've been wondering why we're where we're at. And I think there may be a different way. So let's kind of look around us. We do a sales summit 2 times a year at UT Dallas. And it's really designed for executives. All sales enablement people are invited for free. We don't do it online, unfortunately. It is live at Dallas. And the whole purpose of that summit is to get leaders together and have these conversations. And I spend the 6 months finding breakouts. So if I find a breakout in any of the partners, I ask them to teach everybody else that leapfrog that they've made to the rest of the community. And that's how we've gotten smarter. And the partners we work get smarter because they go to summits, or they don't go to our summits. And then I have a meeting with them and they're like, well, why are we dealing with this? I'm like, that was covered 3 years ago in our summit.
I like it. It all sounds very good.
Hey, Dr. Dover, we had another question come from Dell in our audience about what helps companies effectively understand the buyer's journey.
I think the buyer's journey is, once again, assuming we have professional salespeople, not classic sales machine people who are trying to hit a quota or an activity metric KPI and in a compliance framework. If I have a real professional, what I'm going to get is I'm going to get the voice of the customer. To be honest with you, this is where we are versus where we could be. The work that was just done by Matt Dixon with the Jolt effect. What Matt was able to do is harness all of the conversation intelligence that's sitting on almost everybody's gong and chorus is the voice of the customer. It's the buyer telling you what their journey is. Are we harvesting that? Now, I'm okay with us asking this question of, well, who does that work? Great question. I don't think we figured that out. Have we? I mean, conversation intelligence just exploded on us because of the pandemic. Now, we have the voice of the customer. And so Matt Dixon said, wow, I have millions of calls. Maybe I should go analyze it and see if I can figure out what the buyer is really doing. And he said, actually, it has nothing to do with FOMO. It has to do with, I'm worried about messing up. I'm worried about damaging my career when I buy. Well, that's a huge concept in the buyer's journey that Matt and Ted gave us with their research. I think there's a lot of insight that can come in around your buyer's journey. But once again, see who does that job, right? We don't know because that's a modern concept that doesn't really fit with our classic go-to-market strategy.
I'm afraid we're going to have to put a pin in it. And thank you, Dr. Dover, for being with us today. This has been a great discussion. I'm so glad it's recorded because I feel like there's whole points I want to go back and listen to again. I do want to, at the end of our session, give our floor over to Jess Ellis to just tell a little bit about the session we've got coming up at the end of the month. We'll give a short preview and then we'll get everybody out of here on time. So thank you again, Dr. Dover, and Jess, take it away.
Thank you. And yes, obviously, thank you so much. And great to see everyone, whether you're on the SES board or part of our community or just decided to come and join us today. It was a pleasure and a really good conversation. So just a quick introduction. My name is Jess Ellis. I'm part of our SES Chicago board and really have been thinking about an idea that came into my mind quite recently. As someone in the community who's going through a job transition, I had thought about, you know what, I wish I would have had an opportunity to take a step back and really think about what is my professional narrative. Commonly whether you're in a transition or you're maybe looking for your next opportunity or even just your new career, like your next career step, whatever that looks like, or even just when you're having coffee and networking, one of the common questions I know I would hear is, so what are you working on? Or what do you want to do next? And, you know, what's kind of top of mind? And I found myself in this frame of mind where I was just kind of rambling on with an answer that was probably long-winded and probably not really relevant. And so after a few of those conversations, I started to think about what is that narrative and what are the components I want to relay quickly within those professional kind of conversations. And so this might be something perhaps that you're thinking about for yourself. And I had talked to some of our other SES community members here and there who said, yeah, actually, that sounds like something I would also be interested in. And so we sort of took it to say, you know what, let's just take this to the community. So what we'll do just from a logistical standpoint, we'll have an event. It'll be on Zoom, just like we are right now, on January 31st from 12 to 1 Central Time. So same time as we are right now. And we've got something coming for you on LinkedIn to sign up as well. But really, the session is much, much different. If you show up, it's really going to be expected that you come in with either a blank document or a blank piece of paper, and you're really ready to start crafting that narrative and working either with a partner or with a small group to put that pen on paper or put some keys going if you're doing it virtually on your keyboard. Whatever that outcome is, the goal is for you to get that narrative down and really start practicing that narrative and really having that opportunity to do so. I think sometimes we just don't get into practicing enough. I know I don't as well. So it's just a great skill. It's a great refresh and a great thing to kind of do at the start of the new year. So again, if you guys have any questions, you can just send me something on LinkedIn. You can send it in Zoom here. I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes if anyone has any questions. But if this is something that you feel would be of benefit or just something that you think someone you know could use it, whatever that is, don't hesitate. And I look forward to hopefully seeing some of you, if not all of you, in a couple of weeks. Thanks so much, Alex and Gail, for everything. And then, of course, Dr. Dover for everything. It was an awesome session.
Thank you. And Jess, I'm looking forward to it. Even for people who aren't job hunting, it's really great to step back and look at your own story. I was talking earlier about how as a company, Juniper Square, we're putting our entire SKO theme is all around storytelling. And I think it's reminding me and talking to Jess about this session about telling our own stories. So that intentionality, whether you're job hunting or not, it's a great opportunity to get back to that and really workshop it. And we love doing sessions that are workshop based. Totally. So with that, we're going to shut down for today. Thanks everybody for being part of the session. We have recorded it. We'll post it out on our Magic YouTube channel that Shannon set up for us. And we're looking forward to seeing everyone again in a couple of weeks. For everybody working on SKOs, our thoughts and prayers are with you. Please reach out to this community and let's help each other and make sure that we're all ready to go live in a couple of weeks. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.